It's time for episode 8 of your fortnightly Off the Rails video games podcast. Ready or not, here we go! 16 weeks we've been doing this now. Can you believe it? We've come a short way in that time, but we're still here, and so are the things that have brought us together. Of course, I'm talking about video games. That is, after all, what I do on this podcast. Well, mostly at least. For anyone new here, I am the offrailgamer, and if you should feel so inclined, you can find me on YouTube, where I post video game captures, or you can look to Twitch and TikTok, where I live stream games. On YouTube, I try to post videos every Saturday at 10 AM. This podcast goes out to Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music every other Thursday, but not currently at a particular set time. I don't yet have a timetable for the lives, but if you're interested, you can give me a cheeky little follow on Twitter and I'll try to keep you abreast of my carryings on. Quick warning, I'm not affiliated anywhere, but if you want to be certain that it's me you're finding anywhere, just follow my links. Oh yeah, you can find my links in the podcast description. Now I feel we've been doing this long enough that you don't need the rundown of what's to come in this podcast anymore. If you are new here, you shouldn't find any nasty surprises. I think we have a fairly standard format here. That being said, I hope you'll see something in this that resonates with you. Or hear something, rather. I guess there's not much to see when you're listening to an audio podcast. Just one more thing before I set you loose on the remainder of the episode, and that is to say that if you want to interact with the Off the Rails podcast, you can. offrailgamer@gmail.com. Check the podcast description now. Is where you can reach out with any comments, questions, concerns, or any other kind of feedback. Please be kind though, I'm a sensitive soul, and I don't want to be kept awake all night crying into my therapy pillow. Also, if you keep your comments clean, they just might get a feature in a future podcast. Alternatively, since publishing the last episode, I've finally become aware of Spotify feedback, so I'd just like to thank Senbon Spotify for your positive comment left on episode 5, in which we looked back at Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. Now that I've cottoned on to this means of interaction, I will look to customize these questions going forward, and perhaps that will be the best way to open a dialogue on all things video game. And with all that covered now, allow me, if you will, to tell you all about what I've been playing recently in our first segment, in which I tell you all about what I've been playing recently. Shortly after podcast 7 aired, I uploaded a video to YouTube in which I tried my hand at a career change in Bus Simulator 21. Oh boy, I ran into some technical difficulties when capturing gameplay for this episode, which meant that my initial efforts failed to record. Luckily, this meant that you didn't have to watch me muddle through the tutorials. Believe it or not, I had some idea what I was doing by the time you got to see me behind the wheel in some hot bus driver action. I had a lot of fun with this game, but given the number of times I mounted the curb, I don't think Stagecoach will be sending me a contract anytime soon. Of course, other bus companies are available. Bus Simulator, as you will see if you watch my video, isn't just about ferrying people between stops. You also have to print tickets for some passengers and give exact change to those that decide to hand you $20 for a fare that only costs $1.80. What's wrong with these people? I think our transit company's next upgrade should be to install contactless payments and embrace this cashless age. Next on the channel, we were going to go for gold in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This was the VOD from a Twitch stream I'd gone live with, following Nintendo's release of the Booster Course 5, and 8 new tracks to whip around whilst flinging tortoise shells and banana peels at one another. I won't now bore you by listing off all the new tracks one by one, don't worry. Besides, the booster pack has been out a good few weeks now. But if you do want to see what I'm talking about, well, it's tough luck, I'm afraid, as the VOD is in a format incompatible with YouTube or my video editing software, so I can't post it. Instead, we had a little look at a game called Broken Age. I can't honestly tell you what this game is about, but from what little I did play of it, it seems to have a quirky sense of humour, and I sure am looking forward to getting back to it at some time soon. Over on a different platform, I've now started live streaming on TikTok, on which I played some more Mario Kart, a bit of Stardew Valley, and perhaps most excitingly, I played some air combat on the PS1. For anyone who might have caught it, you may remember that I streamed air combat for Game Void over on Twitch more than a year ago, but I never saved down the VOD from that stream, so to my knowledge, there's no evidence of this any longer. Let's not dwell on that though, because air combat is an excellent game that I had no appreciation for as a kid. Growing up, I put the disc in for about 10 minutes and then went back to playing something else, probably Tekken 3 or Road Rash, knowing what I was like at the time. But young me was wrong. Very, very wrong. Air combat puts you in the cockpit of a fighter jet and take to the skies, almost putting you in the lead role of your very own Top Gun movie. Added to this is an absolutely killer soundtrack consisting of truly epic guitar solos that really make you feel like an 80s action hero. All said, I have a much higher opinion of this game now than I did as a naive young boy. I know I still need to get good, as today's whippersnappers are wont to say, but at least I can now have fun with air combat and give it the praise it has always deserved. Since the last podcast, I've picked up a few new games, or rather, not so very new, as they released on PS1 and PS2. What I mean to say is that they're new to my collection. Anyway, first up, I grabbed a copy of Mortal Kombat Deception, primarily because I learned of puzzle combat, which is essentially bubble pop, but winning causes you to finish your opponents as the two characters duke it out through each level. It looks a little bit like Worm's Blast, if that helps you to picture it at all. I also picked up Woody Woodpecker Racing on the PS1, which looks to be your standard Mario Kart clone that was all the rage back in the day. Wait, hold on, what am I saying? With games like Sonic Team Racing and Nickelodeon Kart Racers, these games are as much in vogue today as they ever were, I guess. And lastly, for PS1, I picked up Santa Claus Saves the Earth. For my UK listeners, I believe that would be Father Christmas, at least as a rough translation into English. Now be warned, I don't know if this game is any good, but I imagine it will be making its way onto my YouTube channel for the festive period one year. So that's to look forward to then, isn't it? In Red Dead Redemption 2, Arthur finally helped Uncle rob that stagecoach. I spoke of this all the way back in episode 6. Joined by Bill and Charles, the four of them bit off a little more than they could chew when a number of Leviticus Cornwall's men arrived on the scene with intent to protect his assets. Making off with a small score, the gang sought to hide out in an abandoned barn until the heat died down. Unfortunately, they were tracked down that night, but after a gunfight, which was extended into the nearby woodland, our friends split up and made their escape. Arthur fled to the nearby town of Rhodes, where he met a drunk down-and-out who pled with Arthur to retrieve some of his personal effects from the home he had recently lost. Now, would you Adam and Eve it? This quest only took us back to the location of last night's shootout, and law enforcement was still investigating the scene. Luckily, Arthur maintained a low profile around this posse until they finished up. He then entered the house, which used to belong to Jeremiah Compson, only to learn that the former occupant used to be a slaver during the American Civil War. Naturally, Arthur was appalled by Compson's chosen career, so, when we caught up with him later on, Arthur cast the requested items into the campfire that Compson had built for himself, and we left the old man to wallow in his own misery and self-pity. Now this segment seems to be running away from me, so, mindful of how we're doing for time, who wants some gaming news? Form an orderly queue. I'm sure there's enough news for everyone. I learned very recently that a new Star Trek game is releasing. You'll never guess when. Only October this year. So now we have Spider-Man 2, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Cities Skylines 2, The Grinch Christmas Adventures, and Star Trek Resurgence, all dropping at around the same time. I mean, seriously, what is a boy to do? I certainly can't be expected to play all of these at once. Anyway, do you want to know something really cool? Resurgence has cast Jonathan Frakes to voice Captain Riker, and is going to be set not too long after the events of The Next Generation. I don't know about you, but I was personally pretty freaking excited when I read that. If you're interested, Star Trek Resurgence is coming out 7th of October, so keep a lookout, or get your pre-order in now. In other news, it looks like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are joining the roster of playable fighters in Street Fighter 6, so if you own this game already, you might want to check out the IGN link I posted in the episode description. And if you haven't got your copy of Street Fighter 6 yet, will this update persuade you to buy it? Why not let me know through the usual channels, and let's talk turtles. Of course, it goes without saying that Donatello's the best. Don't even try to deny it. But other than that, I didn't really spot much else in terms of gaming news this time around. Have all the games journalists gone on their summer holidays or something? I did consider making something up here, so this segment wouldn't be so short, but much like George Washington, I've been given the nickname Honest Abe precisely because of my sheer incapacity for telling lies. Kinda like all the NPCs in that Ricky Gervais film, The Invention of Lying. I still haven't seen that yet, but it looks quite good, so I must try and get round to it sometime. Anyway, as that's all I have for gaming news, and let me tell you, I'm as disappointed as you are at the lack of news this week. Unless, of course, you're not really bothered, in which case I'm probably more disappointed than you are. Or, of course, you might feel things much more intensely than I can, in which case there's a possibility that I'm less disappointed than you are. Anyway, as that's all I have for gaming news, let's turn now to the main event, shall we? Before I really get going, who caught it in the last episode, eh? Come on, who caught it? Supposedly a list of 10 games I didn't love, and yet, if you were really paying attention, you'll have noticed I only included 9 games. Now, I could be honest with you and tell you that this was a mistaken oversight on my part when scripting the episode, but instead I'm going to tell you a great big fib and claim that it was a test and deliberate hook to encourage feedback from you, the listeners, and kickstart some listener engagement. So, what game was missing, I hear you ask? Figuratively, of course, don't worry. You're listening to me. I can't hear you back, that's not how this works. But in reply, I'll tell you that it was Greedfall. This is another game that I don't despise. In fact, I'm feeling inclined to give it a second chance very soon, because it has an intriguing premise that has very much captured my imagination. I just didn't get very far into it before giving up on my first playthrough. If you don't know, or don't remember anything about Greedfall, essentially there's some kind of plague, but there are also rumours of a possible cure in the New World, which you will travel to in search of said possible cure. Oh, and there's also huge monsters everywhere which are really going to try and get in your way the very best that they can. And that should, unless I'm very much mistaken, conclude episode 7, so now we can get on with episode 8, which we really should have been doing this entire time. So what should we talk about now? Well, in fact this week I want to talk to you about one of my favourite games. It certainly ranks highly in my top 10, but when I tell you what it is, it may come as some surprise to you, as it's certainly not a big AAA title. Directed by Joseph Fares of A Way Out fame, and developed by Starbreeze Studios, the topic of this week's podcast is 2013's Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. Beware, spoilers ahead. If this 10-year-old game is still on your to-play list, I'd advise getting it off that list and then coming back to listen to what I have to say about it. And with that said, let me now tell you exactly what I have to say about it. It's all good, I can tell you that much right away. Okay, so, what exactly is this game, you may be asking yourself? Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons is a unique single-player game in which you take control of both protagonists at the same time. The two brothers, Naya and Naive, that is. Although presented in a beautiful cel-shaded art style, Brothers does not flinch away from dark themes. The game opens on a cutscene of the younger brother, Nai, on a boat with their mother, being tossed about by ferocious waves amidst a raging storm. Sadly, the mother is sent overboard, and Nai is too small and weak to haul her back into the vessel. The cutscene fades to Nai mourning at his mother's gravestone, but almost immediately interrupted by the urgent calls from his older brother. Now their father is very sick, and Naya has managed to help him onto a handcart, but it takes the strength of both sons to wheel him to the local doctor or healer. Let's briefly pause from the storyline here, as I can imagine you're wondering how convoluted the controls must be to be able to move both characters simultaneously. One of the joys of Brothers is the simplistic control system, which means there is no detraction from the storyline that unfolds. It's important to note, though, that I wouldn't exactly class this as just another walking simulator, as there are numerous puzzles to solve along the way. The game does follow a very linear plot, though there is some opportunity to explore, and there are plenty of secret asides that can be missed if you don't stray from the intended path at all. But what about the controls, Offrail G? I thought you were going to tell us about the controls, man. Yes, well, I was just coming back to that, thank you, and I'll ask you to save any further questions for the end of this presentation, if you don't mind. The controls are, as I've said previously, very simple, with one brother controlled by the left analog stick and left trigger, and the other brother controlled by the right analog stick and right trigger. And that's all there is to it, with the analog sticks controlling movement and the triggers controlling interaction, from creating distractions by whistling and yelling to physically interacting with the in-world objects or climbing cliffs and structures. Pappy's not well, and the boys have delivered him to the local physician, who shows them a map to a great old tree where they can source an elixir that will restore Daddy-O to health. Without a second thought, the two boys dash off to find this cure-all. But what's this? As you try to navigate through the labyrinthine streets of the village, a young ne'er-do-well barricades your way, locking gates that stand in your path and blowing raspberries before scampering off. Soon enough, you catch up to him, only by parkouring over rooftops and high walls, and release a fierce... puppy? Oh yes, the ruffian has a fear of all things canine and ends up cornered by a sweet little puppy. They won't be casting that boy in the reboot series of Die Hard films, almost certain to come out in the next few years. I mean, come on, Hollywood, care for a side of originality with all your remakes you seem to love churning out. Anyway, on the other side of the village, you can throw a little girl's ball down a well and make her cry if you want. I mean, maybe don't do that because it's cruel and unnecessary. But if you are cruel and unnecessary, and I know I am, this is something you can do. Next is a nice little puzzle involving a sheep and a treadmill to get across the river by the old mill. But just 100 yards or so down the path is your first encounter with genuine mild peril. Farmer's just harvested and baled his straw yield, which offers platforms for the two brothers to scurry to and find temporary safety out of the reach of Farmer's dog. And this time, it's no playful pup. This is where your distraction controls first come into play. Send Naya jogging to the first bale, where he can taunt the dog while Nai runs to the next. Rinse and repeat until the two boys safely exit the field, and the reach of Rover. Phew! With that out of the way, who among you likes bouldering? Because that's the next activity on today's itinerary, as you scale the nearest cliff and start climbing into the mountains. Along the way you run into a scary-looking rock troll, but the game is about to teach you that looks can be deceiving, as he helps you to ascend to the peak, where you enter a cave that's too small for the troll to follow. From here, it's just the two of you again. As you crawl into the cave, it opens out into a massive network of huge caverns full of mining equipment and steampunk lifts and contraptions. The path leads to a short roller coaster network that takes you down into the belly of the mountain. You won't be coming back this way, that's for sure. When you land, up ahead you spy a female troll imprisoned in a cage. Her jailer is sleeping just beyond a locked gate, and after a little stealth action, Nai managed to retrieve the key and unlock the cage. But, oh no! The noise of clanging metal has woken the jailer, who flies into a murderous rage. Good thing he's none too bright. and there's this empty cage you can lure him into. Mistral helps the boys navigate to the cavern exit, where she is reunited with our man on the outside who helped us climb the mountain. As they embrace, the jailer from earlier crashes into the arena, and you must dispatch him before the BFG troll can lift you out to safety. I don't want to spoil every puzzle for you, but suffice to say, you're soon back out in the fresh air and waving goodbye to your new friends who point you in the right direction as you embark on the next stage of your quest. And the next stage of your quest takes you into the hills, but on this occasion you take 4-leg drive on the backs of a pair of mountain goats. At the end of this trip you come across an inventor who's only too happy to lend you his marvellous flying machine. Essentially it's some kind of Da Vinci looking hang glider. All aboard! You run the contraption down the launch ramp and take to the skies. But look out! Don't crash into that mountain. Oh, there's a tunnel we can soar through. Phew. Only not phew. This tunnel is full of bats, and we've disturbed their slumber, and now they're wrecking up our lone marvellous flying machine. Brace yourselves for impact. We're going down! Carrots still intact, our heroes now have some more climbing to do, up to the ramparts of a castle. This is one of my favourite sections of the game. The brothers, resourceful as they are, find a rope that they tie around their waists so that they can swing between some crumbling old stone statues in order to get up to a point on the castle tower from which they can climb to an open window, from which some very sad sounds are emanating. Up you go, but when you enter, you'll find yourself in some oversized laboratory and walk beneath a colossal magnifying glass. It is in this room that you find the source of those sad wailing sounds. A poor griffin, with the face of an owl rather than an eagle, is living a life of forced captivity. Upon freeing it, the creature offers you a ride on its back, and once again you take to the skies. After a less turbulent landing, you find that the griffin is wounded. I imagine it had been hunted before it was caged. Now this is one of the moments that ultimately cemented this game as one of my favourites, not because I'm some kind of twisted psychopath, but because, as I say, this game doesn't shy away from some pretty deep themes, one of which I've opted to exclude from the podcast already. Unfortunately, this was the griffin's last flight, and the animal curls up and takes its final sleep. It's nightfall, and the boys find themselves in the woods being hotly pursued by some hungry wolves. You escape their salivating jaws into a cemetery where you ring a bell to wake the gravedigger. Now, rather than offering you refuge from the perils of the night, he instead takes a look at the map you were given at the start of the game and begrudgingly points you in the right direction. But out of the frying pan into the fire, you're now harassed by some rather handsy trees. In an effort to flee from their literal clutches, the boys fall into a ravine and some deep water. Being a forest of nightmares, this sends the boys into some kind of lucid dream state where they believe they have been reunited with their mother, who is now a giant. This dream sequence ends with Naya throttling Nai. Quick to put their differences aside, the boys snap out of it before inflicting any fatalities, and hug it out before continuing on into the aftermath of a particularly bloody battle. But all of the corpses are strangely giant? Wait, like the giant's laboratory back in the castle? Precisely. Now it's all coming together. In yet another strange turn of events, the brothers ultimately end up soaking themselves in the giant's blood to disguise themselves as some kind of pagan deity so that they can free a young woman who is about to be executed as a sacrifice to said godly idol. Before too long, the jig is up, and the boys and their new lady friend find themselves running for their lives, narrowly escaping their enraged pursuers into a rowboat. Let's go see some orcas. After a short voyage, the trio stumble across a winter wonderland, but instead of being Roy Wood's idea of heaven, the local population have all perished, their last moments preserved as literal snowmen. The city is not yet totally deserted, though. It is haunted by an invisible, abominable snowman who, if you present him the opportunity, will devour the boys as a tasty snack. Assuming you survive this most recent ordeal, though, our nameless companion will lure Naya into a tunnel. Naya tries to stop his older brother and remind him of their true quest, but love-struck Naya pays him no heed and follows his heart's new desire. Unfortunately, much like in Star Wars, it's a trap! In fact, that's also a line from another one of my favourite video games, Time Crisis, but that's for a different episode. Miss Lady reveals her true nature and warps into a human-spider hybrid. One by one the boys pull each of her legs off, but in a final act of absolute treachery, she pierces Naya's stomach with her deadly venomous stinger. Oof! That's gotta hurt. And indeed it does. But finally a little luck comes our way. The boys find themselves at the foot of the great tree they have been searching for. While Naya is now much too sick to do anything, Nai races to the top of the tree and the source of the cure-all antidote that the physician sent them out to collect. Nai fills his canteen and returns to his brother just as quick as he can. Naya is regrettably dead, and the game now makes you, controlling only Nai from this point forward, bury Naya in a shallow grave. The hole is dug, but you must drag the corpse and then fill it in by pushing the piles of dirt over the now cold body. Exhausted and alone and miles from home, all Nai can do is sob in a combination of grief and despair. Fortunately, another griffin shows up after some time and offers to take Nai home, so, every cloud has a silver lining and all that. And Nai gets home with the elixir in time to save his father's life. The game concludes with father and son mourning at 2 gravestones, where there was only one previously. They have erected a monument to the memory of Naya, which stands next to his mother's. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons isn't a very long game, coming in at somewhere between 3 or 4 hours. But it's a really moving experience that left me genuinely speechless and in awe after my first playthrough. Don't be fooled by its almost cartoony graphics. This game unashamedly stares down some pretty heavy subject matter. But ultimately, Brothers delivers a truly unique experience, even down to the control scheme, and in my honest opinion, I really think this deserves a look if you haven't played it already. And that's all she wrote. Or all I wrote, anyway. That's it for episode 8 of Off the Rails. New YouTube content this Saturday. I can't tell you what it's going to be yet because at the time of recording this, I don't know myself. Until next time then. Bye!